All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu. The world is in a constant state of war, cultural war, economic war, proxy wars, and the most destructive, the most important, that very few people see it, psychological war. It has many names. You might know it by ideological war, propaganda, or as Yuri Bezmenov calls it, subversion. I will let him explain in his own words what subversion means.
Subversion is the term, is explained as a part of activity to destroy things like religion, government, economical system of a country. Subversion in Soviet terminology means always a destructive, aggressive activity aimed to destroy the country, nation, or geographical area of your enemy. This activity is overt, legitimate, and easily observable if you give yourself time and trouble to observe it. But according to the law, it's not a crime. Subverter is a student who comes for exchange, a diplomat, an actor, an artist, a journalist like myself. Subversion is an activity which is a two-way traffic. You cannot subvert an enemy which doesn't want to be subverted. Subversion can be only successful when the agent of subversion has a responsive target. It's a two-way traffic. United States is a receptive target of subversion. The theory of subversion goes all the way back 2,500 years ago. The first human being who formulated the tactics of subversion was a Chinese philosopher by the name of Sun Tzu. He was an advisor for several imperial courts in ancient China. And he said, to implement state policy in a warlike manner, it's the most counterproductive, barbaric, and inefficient to fight on a battlefield. This is the most idiotic way to do it. The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in the country of your enemy, until such time that the perception of reality of your enemy is screwed up to such an extent that he does not perceive you as an enemy. The final stage of subversion, after which you can simply take your enemy without a single shot being fired.
Exactly. Why sacrifice the life of your men in all-out combat when you can watch your enemy crumble from within? This man, Yuri Bezmenov, was a former KGB agent from the Soviet Union that defected to the USA to expose how the West is being destroyed from within by unelected bodies and global international entities. In order to destroy a nation, it must be a free nation with open borders, permissive. It must be a democracy in order to allow anyone to express and in some instances promote opinions of allegedly marginalized groups. A destructive idea can be at first disguised as a harmless, benevolent, or even altruistic one, without thinking thoroughly about the consequences of that particular idea. Those ideas in the hands of lawmakers can be more destructive than any atomic bomb. Subversion, as Yuri explains it, is made out of 4 steps: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Let's start with the first one.
Demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a society. Why 15 or 20 years? This is the time sufficient to educate one generation of students or children. One generation, one lifetime span of a person, a human being, which is dedicated to study, to shaping up the outlook, ideology, personality. No more, no less. Usually it takes from 15 to 20 years. What it includes? It includes infiltration, propaganda methods, direct contacts, doesn't really matter, of various areas where public opinion is formulated or shaped. Religion, educational system, social life, administration, law enforcement system, and labor and employer relations. The target country, if it's a free democratic society, there are many different movements within the society. There are people who are against this society. They may be simple criminals, ideologically in disagreement with the state policy, conscientious enemies, simply psychotic personalities who are against anything. And finally, there are a small group of agents of a foreign nation, bought, subverted, recruited. The moment all these movements will be directed in one direction, this is the time to catch that movement and to continue it until the movement forces the whole society into collapse, into crisis. We don't stop an enemy. We let him go go. We help him to go in the direction we want them to go. There are tendencies in each society, in each country, which are going to opposite direction from the basic moral values and principles. To take advantage of these movements, to capitalize on them, is the main purpose of the originator of subversion. So we have religion, education, social life, power structure, we have labor relations, law and order. These are the areas of application of subversion. In case of religion, destroy it, ridicule it, replace it with various sects, cults, which bring people's attention, faith, whether it is naive, primitive, doesn't really matter. As long as the basically accepted religious dogma is being slowly eroded and taken away from the supreme purpose of religion, to keep people in touch with the supreme being, that serves the purpose. Therefore, replace accepted, respected religious organizations with fake organizations. Distract people's attention from the real faith and attract them to various different faiths. Education. Distract them from learning something which is constructive, pragmatic, efficient. Instead of mathematics, physics, foreign languages, chemistry, teach them history of urban warfare, natural food, home economy, your sexuality, anything. As long as it takes you away, social life, take away the initiative from people, take away the responsibility from naturally established links between individuals, group of individuals, and society at large, and replace them with artificially, bureaucratically controlled bodies. Instead of social life and friendship between neighbors, establish social workers institutions. People who are on payroll of whom? Society? No. Bureaucracy. The main concern of social workers is not your family, not you, not social relations between groups of people. The main concern is to get the paycheck from the government. Power structure. The natural bodies of administration, which are traditionally either elected by people at large or appointed by elected leaders of society, are being actively substituted by artificial bodies. The bodies of people, groups of people, whom nobody elected. Never. As a matter of fact, most of the people don't like them at all, and yet they exist. One of such group is media. Who elected them? How come they have so much power? Almost monopolistic power on your mind. They can rape your mind. But who elected them? They have a nerve to decide what is good and what is bad for the elected by you, president, and his administration. Who the hell are they? They think they know. They don't. The level of mediocrity in a big establishment like New York Times, Los Angeles Times, major television network, you don't have to be excellent journalist. You have to be exactly a mediocre journalist. That's easier to survive. There's no competition anymore. You have your good, nice income, $100,000 a year. That's it. Whether you are better or worse doesn't really matter anymore. As soon as you're smiling to the camera and do your job. Power structure slowly is eroded by the bodies and groups of people who do not have neither qualification nor the will of people to keep them in power, and yet they do have power. Law enforcement, law and order organization and structure is being eroded. For the last 20, 25 years, if you see old movies and new movies, you can see that in new movies, a policeman, an officer of the United States Army looks dumb, angry, psychotic, paranoid. A criminal looks nice, kind of. He smokes hash and shoots the whatever drug. But basically, he's a nice human being. He's creative. And he's unproductive only because society oppresses him. Whereby a general of Pentagon is always, by definition, a dumb, a war maniac. A policeman is a pig. He abuses his power. The hatred, the mistrust to the people who are supposed to protect you and enforce law and order. Whereby a criminal is not a criminal, actually. He's a defendant, even if his guilt is proven. Labor relations. At this stage, within 15 to 20 years, we destroy the traditionally established links of bargaining between employer and employee. The classical Marxist-Leninist theory of natural exchange of goods. A person A has 5 sacks of grain and person B has 5 pairs of shoes. And the natural exchange without money is when they bargain between each other. And only with the introduction of the third force, C, who says, no, don't give him 5 sacks of grain, give it to me, and you give me your 5 pairs of shoes, and I will distribute it accordingly, so the economy will go. This is the death of natural exchange. Well, trade unions were established 100 years ago. The objective was to improve working conditions and to protect the rights of workers from those employers who were abusing their right because they had more money. Objectively, at that time, initially, the trade union movement did work. What we see now is that the bargaining process is no longer resulting in the compromise, which is leading objectively to betterment of working conditions and increase of salary. What we see is that after each prolonged strike, the workers lose. Even if they have 10% increase of their salaries, they cannot catch up due to inflation and due to missed time. More than that, millions of people suffer from that strike because economy now is interdependent. It's intertwined like one body. If previously steel workers, say 100 years ago, could strike and nobody would suffer, now it's impossible anymore. If a garbage collector strikes today, the rest of the multi-million city is stinking. Who benefited? The leaders of trade unions. What is the motivation for strike? Improving a workers' condition? No, obviously it's not. Then what is it? Ideology. To prove to these capitalists and the obedient horde of workers like sheep follow these people and they cannot disobey. Why? This is what happens basically. The natural tendencies are being greatly taken advantage of and capitalized by the Soviet propaganda systems. How? Whenever trade union strikes, we have influx of propaganda, mass media, ideological dissemination. The workers' right, and we repeat it like parrots. Yes, workers' right. Whose rights? Workers? No. The only freedom of worker to sell his labor according to his own desire and will is taken away from him. By whom? By trade union boss. Unlimited power is given. I want to sell my labor not for $2.50 an hour, but for $2. I don't have right. My freedom is denied to me. I know that if I sell my work for $2 an hour, not for $3 an hour, I will compete better with the other guy who is lazy and more greedy. I don't need $3. I need only $2. No. I was made to believe by media, by business, by advertising agencies that I need more and more and more. Have you ever heard any advertising on TV to consume less? No. No way. Whether you need a 6-cylinder car or not, you have to buy it. Save by buying more. A propaganda of illegitimate aspirations of working class, betterment of life, equality. Equality, mind you. President Kennedy once said, we will make America to believe that people are born equal. Are people born equal? Is there any mentioning in the Bible or any other holy scripture in any religion there is not a single word about equality? Just the opposite. By your deeds, God will judge you. What you do is important. The merit of your personality. You cannot legislate equality. And yet we build our society on the principle of equality. We say people are equal. We know it is false. It's a lie. If we put the principle of equality in the basis of our socio-political structure, it's the same thing as building a house on sand. Sooner or later, it will collapse. And that's exactly what happens. And we, as Soviet propaganda makers, are trying to push you in the direction which you go yourself. Equality. Yes, equality. People are equal. Land of equal opportunities. Is it true or not? Think about it. Equal opportunities. Should there be equal opportunities? For me and for a lazy bastard who come here from some other country and immediately registered as a welfare recipient benefit. United States administration under Carter imported thousands of Cuban criminals. Do you think it's fair if myself and my wife from Philippines who work like horse should have the same rights as a criminal from Cuba? Why? And yet we repeat as parrots, equality, equality, equality. So the moment you bring a country to the point of almost total demoralization, when nothing works anymore, where there's no division between evil and good, when even the leaders of church sometimes say, well, violence for the sake of justice, especially social justice, is justified. And we listen to them and say, yeah, probably it's true. Is it true? No, it is not true. Violence is not justified, especially for the sake of quote-unquote social justice introduced by Marxist-Leninists.
I don't know if this guy was a former KGB agent or was he fucking Nostradamus? I am Nostradamus! Because every single thing that he talked about in the 80s became true today. For me, it is bone-chilling how accurate his prediction was. Each decade since this interview was filmed, the West had become more degenerate, weaker, more permissive with immigration, more divided than ever. We can clearly see today how we are at each other's throats, and USA especially, it's so divided, and frankly, they're on the brink of a civil war whether they like to admit it or not. Because Orange Man will likely come back, but I might be wrong. Well, we'll see.
The next step is destabilization. Again, this word says for itself what it is. To destabilize all the relations, all the accepted institutions and organizations in a country of your enemy. How you do it? Radicalization of bargaining process. It's impossible to reach a compromise, constructive compromise between neighbors. They cannot compromise. They go to civil court or something like that. Radicalization of human relations. No more compromise. Fight, fight, fight. The normal, traditionally accepted relations are destabilized. The relations between teachers and students. The relations between laborers and employers are further radicalized. No more acceptance of the legitimacy of demands of workers. The violent clashes between passengers, picketers, and the strikers are presented as something normal. Radicalization, militarization sometimes, shooting people. Law and order now also is pushed into the area where previously people settled their differences peacefully and legitimately. Now we are getting court cases in the smallest irrelevant cases. We cannot solve our problems anymore. The society at large becomes more and more antagonistic between individuals, between groups of individuals and the society at large. The media puts himself in the opposition to the society in general, at large. Alienated public figures prominently, they actively include themselves in a political process. All of a sudden we see a homosexual. 15 years ago he did his dirty job and nobody cared. Now he makes it a political issue. He demands recognition, respect, human rights, and there are violent clashes between him and police, his group and ordinary people. No matter what. It's black against white, yellows against green, doesn't matter. As long as this group come into antagonistic clash, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms. That is destabilization.
Again, I think this point is mostly accurate. I don't think the West is 100% destabilized at the point of making of this video, but I think we're nearly there, as you can see. USA's financial debt is at $34 trillion, rising prices in food, housing, gas, oil due to inflation and printing money out of thin air, millions of people evicted or at the brink of eviction by their landlords due to them not being able to pay the rent because they cannot afford it. All this resulting in protests everywhere. Farmers in Netherlands, truckers in Canada, workers in France, Germany, Austria, and militant protests funded by Soros, of course, like BLM and Antifa in USA and many, many more. When you push people to a breaking point, the glass will eventually break.
Crisis. In case of developing nations, the process starts when the legitimate bodies of power, the social structure collapse. It cannot function anymore. So instead, we have artificial's body injected into society, such as non-elected committees. We have all this artificial's body claiming power. If the power is denied to them, they take it by force. Crisis is when society cannot function anymore productively. It collapses. So therefore, the population at large is looking for a savior. The religious groups are expecting a messiah to come. The workers say, we have family to feed. Let's have a strong government, maybe socialist government, centralized. And here we are. We have a savior. So we have two alternatives here. Civil war and invasion. But the result is the same.
I think Yuri overestimated here the amount of time it takes to bring a country like USA into crisis, but however, we can clearly see the ambition of USA is beginning to be stretched too thin. Look at all the foreign proxy wars happening right now. Ukraine versus Russia, Palestine versus Israel, many civil wars in Yemen, Sudan, most of Africa at this point, and the most recent invasion of Iran in the Middle East, or the most anticipated, Taiwan's invasion by China. You can clearly see that NATO has too much on their plate right now, and this will eventually bite them in the ass.
The next stage is normalization. Normalization is a very ironic word, of course. At that stage, the self-appointed rulers of the society don't need any revolution anymore. They don't need any radicalism anymore. Basically, it is stabilizing the country by force. So all the sleepers and activists and social workers and liberals and and homosexuals and professors and Marxists and Leninists are being eliminated physically sometimes. They've done their job already. They are not needed anymore. The new rulers need stability to exploit the nation, to exploit the country, to take advantages of the victory.
I think it is very unrealistic to say that USA will ever be invaded by a foreign power because of their geographical position and military might. But if you're watching this video from the future and we are under rubble and nuclear fallout is melting your face, you can call me an idiot. So how can we reverse the process of subversion? I'll let Yuri explain this one.
The most difficult and at the same time the simplest answer to the subversion is to start it here and even before, by bringing back the society to religion. Something that you cannot touch and eat and put on yourself, but something that rules society and makes it move and preserve it. A Soviet scientist, Shafarevich, who has nothing to do with religion, he's a computer scientist, did a very intensive research on the history of socialist countries. He calls socialist or communist any country with a centralized economy and a pyramidal style of power structure. And he discovered that civilizations like Mohenjo-Daro, like Egypt, like Maya, Incas, like Babylonian culture collapsed and disappeared from the surface of Earth. The moment they lost religion, as simple as that, they disintegrated. The ideas moving society and keeping mankind as a society of human beings, intelligent, moral agents of God. The facts, the truth, the exact knowledge may not. All the sophisticated technology and computers will not prevent society from disintegrating and eventually dying out. Have you ever met a person who would sacrifice his life, freedom for the truth like that? This is truth. I never met a person who said, this is truth and I'm ready to shoot me. But millions sacrifice their life, freedom, comfort, everything for things like God, like Jesus Christ. It's an honor. Some martyrs in the Soviet concentration camp died, and they died in peace, unlike those who shouted, "Long live Stalin." Something which is not material moves society and helps it to survive. And the other way around, the moment we turn into 2 by 2 is 4 and make it a guiding principle of our life, our existence, we die. Even though this is true, and this we cannot prove. We only can feel and have faith in it. So the answer to ideological subversion, strangely enough, is very simple. You simply have to have faith and prevent subversion. In other words, not to be a victim of subversion. Don't try to be a person who in judo is trying to smash your enemy and being caught by your hand. Don't strike like that. Strike with the power of your spirit and moral superiority. If you don't have that power, it's high time to develop it. And that's the only answer.
As you can see in our modern enlightened world, our lack of faith in God, our lack of morals has plunged us into this true dark age, where we are little more than drones, following our programming, our daily meaningless routines, indulging consumerism, while we are slaves to the system that we live in. You see, what Yuri said in those 2 interviews 40 years ago, it is bone-chilling for someone like me. And I ask myself, what can we learn from this? I would say listen to different voices, those that go against the established narrative, to not dismiss them as conspiracy theorists like Yuri was labeled by the liberal media back in the day, to pay attention to what they say and to realize that tradition, religion, and our culture are the fundamental pillars that which our civilization is built upon by our ancestors thousands of years ago, that we should preserve those traditions for the very survival of our civilization. I urge you, watch the full interview. I linked it in the description below. It is eye-opening to say the least. When I first saw those interviews years ago, my jaw dropped. So I urge you, watch them and pay attention.